The auditorium lights go out. On the screen, a teacher's cold voice echoes, humiliating a Latino student in front of the entire school. What she didn't know is that that video would change not only his life, but the fate of everyone in Miami. A story about prejudice, regret, and the transformative power of forgiveness. If this story already gave you goosebumps in the first few seconds, leave it at that. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because today, justice will speak louder than pride. It was Monday, the first day of the semester at Lincoln High School, one of the best-known schools in Miami. The sun shone brightly over the courtyard, reflecting off the glass of the metal lockers and the students' colorful backpacks. For many, that day was just another beginning. But for Miguel Herrera, it was a new beginning. The son of immigrants who worked in a small local restaurant, Miguel was 16 years old and carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He wore simple clothes, the same worn-out pair of sneakers as always, and a notebook whose cover was already starting to come loose. But even with so little, there was something in his gaze that caught attention. A serene, almost stubborn glow of someone who would not let himself be beaten. As I walked through the halls, I heard whispers and giggles. Some students looked at him with disdain. Others ignored him completely. It was as if poverty had a scent that others could smell from afar. Miguel pretended not to care. But inside, every laugh was a silent cut, and he didn't even know that that day would be the beginning of something that would mark the entire school. The teacher, Samantha Collins, entered the room with the steady sound of her heels echoing across the floor. Tall, blonde, elegant-looking, she had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Known for her strictness and impeccable standards, she prided herself on maintaining a reputation for excellence, though for many students, her excellence had another name, prejudice disguised as discipline. "Good morning, class," she said, writing her name on the board with firm strokes. "I hope you're all ready for a real semester." As he spoke, his gaze swept over the desks until it landed on Miguel. Simple clothes, old notebook, the backpack with the broken zipper. She arched an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Miguel, madam. Miguel Herrera." "Oh, yes?" she said with a subtle hint of irony. "The new scholarship student." Some students laughed. Miguel lowered his eyes, without reacting. Samantha continued, "I hope you can keep up with the pace, Mr. Herrera. We're not serving dollar fast food here." Laughter was now widespread. Miguel swallowed hard. Every word she said weighed more than she could admit. But he limited himself to responding with a brief, "Yes, ma'am." During class, Samantha made a point of calling out to him several times, always with that challenging tone. He asked him to read complex texts, corrected his pronunciation with disdain, and made comments disguised as lessons. "At your old school, did you actually study English, or just the menu from your parents' restaurant?" Silence filled the room. Some laughed, others just looked on, uncomfortable. Miguel felt his face burn. But he took a deep breath and replied with dignity, "Yes, ma'am, we really studied." Samantha gave a cold smile. "We'll see." At lunchtime, Miguel sat alone at a table in the courtyard. As he ate his paper-wrapped sandwich, he watched the other students with their full trays and loose laughter. That's when a female voice sounded behind him. "Can I sit here?" Era Emily Parker, a kind girl with green eyes and curly hair. The daughter of a retired teacher, she had a sense of justice that made her different from her peers. "Of course," Miguel replied, surprised. The two began to talk. She listened to his story, his struggles and his dreams, and for the first time that day, he smiled. But across the courtyard, Samantha watched through the window of the teacher's lounge. Her look wasn't one of simple disapproval. It was one of irritation. She couldn't stand to see that poor boy getting attention or sympathy. And at that moment, a cruel idea began to form in his mind. Something that, for her, would be a reality lesson for the boy. But for fate, it would be the beginning of biggest scandal Lincoln High School has ever seen. The next morning, the hallway of Lincoln High School, it looked like a parade of new uniforms, and rehearsed laughter. But inside room 204, the air was heavy. Samantha Collins, with her flawless lipstick and sharp gaze, typed something on her laptop while the students whispered. She looked calm, but there was something different. A cold glint in her eyes, a look of someone planning something. When the bell rang, she closed her computer and stood up with a fake smile. Class, today we will have a special activity. I want to see who here really deserves to be in this. School. Miguel, sitting in the last row, felt a shiver. Samantha walked between the desks like a judge in a courtroom. We're going to do an oral exam surprise, he announced. Each person will explain a text in English and say what they understood. A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Samantha raised her hands, feigning innocence. Well, you're in high school, aren't you? You should be ready to think quickly. One by one, the students began to stand up. The children of businessmen and doctors recited with confidence. Some made mistakes, others improvised. But Samantha seemed satisfied until it was Miguel's turn. Mr. Herrera, she said with a poisonous smile, your turn to shine. Miguel stood up, nervous. He picked up the text and began to read. The room fell silent. His voice shook a little, but his English was clear, understandable, sincere. However, when she finished, Samantha crossed her arms. Interesting, she said, pacing in circles. But tell me, Miguel, did you understand the meaning of the metaphor in the last paragraph? Miguel took a deep breath. Yes, ma'am. The author talks about how poverty doesn't define a person's worth, but rather what they do with the opportunities they receive. Some colleagues nodded discreetly, impressed. If Samantha is with them. Oh, how beautiful. It almost seems like you identified with it, doesn't it? The laughter echoed again. Miguel stood still. The teacher approached. Tell us, Miguel, she said, her tone venomous. Did your parents finish school, or did they also stop working washing dishes? The silence was instantaneous. The sound of the question seemed to cut through the air. Even the laughter stopped. Miguel felt his face burn, his heart race. But he kept his head held high. They didn't have a chance, he replied. But they work hard so I can. Samantha took a step back, still with that forced smile. How inspiring, he said sarcastically. I hope your inspiration is enough to get decent grades here. Emily, sitting in the third row, couldn't take it anymore. Teacher, that was cruel. Silence, Miss Parker, Samantha replied. I'm the one who decides what's cruel here. Miguel took a deep breath and sat back down, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. But the scene had been recorded, not just in the students' memories, but on the screens of two discrete cell phones pointed in their direction. At break time, the video was already circulating through the hallways. Samantha's voice, cold and arrogant, echoed through imaginary speakers on the cell phones of dozens of students. Her name was in every conversation, and, without knowing it, the humiliating plan she had created to destroy a student had just turned against her. Meanwhile, Miguel walked alone to the courtyard. Emily reached him, panting. They recorded everything, Miguel. Everyone can see what she did. He stopped, surprised. I don't want any trouble, Emily. It'll only get worse for me. No, Miguel, she replied firmly. This time, she's the one who's going to explain herself. And at that moment, somewhere in the building, Samantha smiled at the mirror in the teacher's lounge, unaware that her image was already beginning to crumble. Pixel by pixel, screen by screen. Fate had pressed play. The next morning, Lincoln High School woke up different. The hallways, normally filled with lazy voices and hurried footsteps, seemed to vibrate with curious murmurs and furtive glances. Everyone was talking about the same thing, the video. A simple 40-second snippet had spread like wildfire. The recording clearly showed the teacher, Samantha Collins, humiliating Miguel in front of the class. His arrogant voice echoed through the headphones of hundreds of students. Did your parents finish school, or did they also stop working washing dishes? The video started with laughter but ended with silence. Silence, the most powerful sound of all. In less than an hour, the video was already in student groups. student pages, and even on local social media profiles. In the comments, indignation grew. That's racism. She should be fired. Poor boy. Look at the way he responds with respect. Samantha's face, once a symbol of authority, was now a symbol of shame. And the most ironic thing was that she still had no idea of the proportions everything was taking. In the teacher's lounge, Samantha corrected tests, oblivious to the storm. It was when the colleague, Susan Miller, she hurried in, holding her cell phone. "Sam, did you see that?" he asked, showing the screen. Samantha looked up, irritated. "What now?" Susan hesitated, but showed it anyway. The frozen image of the video, her, arms crossed, looking contemptuously at Miguel, took up the entire screen. Samantha picked up her phone, her face paling as the video progressed. That's ridiculous," she exclaimed nervously. "They have no right to film me without permission." "Sam," Susan tried to say, lowering her tone, "the problem isn't the video, it's what you said." Samantha's gaze turned cold. "Are you judging me too? I'm telling you this is going to get out of control." "Oh, please," she replied, huffing. "This is just another teenage drama. Tomorrow no one will remember." But at that very moment, the video had already gone beyond the school walls. A local social media page had reposted it with the caption, "Miami teacher humiliates Latino scholarship student in class. Is this what they call education?" Thousands of views in just a few hours. Comments, shares, hashtags. The digital storm had begun, and there was no turning back. Miguel, on the other hand, tried to feign normality. He entered the school with his head down, but noticed something strange. The same colleagues who had laughed at him now looked away, embarrassed. Others greeted him silently, as if apologizing without words. Emily met him in the hallway. "Have you seen how many people are on your side?" she asked, showing her phone. "This has become news everywhere." Miguel's eyes widened. "I didn't want that." "I know," she replied. "But sometimes the truth needs a scandal to be heard." They walked together to the classroom, and when they entered, the environment seemed different. Samantha was there with the same flawless lipstick, but without the same control. The look in the class was different. There was no more admiration. There was a trial. "Open your books, page 30, she said, trying to maintain her composure. But the students' hands did not move. The silence was absolute. Samantha felt the weight of dozens of gazes. "I said, page 30, he repeated, his voice more tense now. It was then that a discreet sound echoed, the sound of a notification. Then another, and another. Everyone looked at their cell phones at the same time. On the screen, the school had sent an emergency notice. All students and faculty must report to the main auditorium at 10 a.m. for a special meeting. Samantha felt her stomach churn. She knew. That was no coincidence. In the auditorium, the management waited. The director, Thomas Reed, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, watched Samantha as the students took their seats. When there was silence, he stood up and said, "First and foremost, I want to remind you that this school has values based on respect and equality, and any behavior contrary to these will be treated with due seriousness." Samantha crossed her arms, trying to maintain control, but the director's gaze fell on her. "Professor Collins, this week's video brought up something that needs to be discussed in public." A buzz ran through the auditorium. Samantha took a deep breath, her face starting to flush. The video started playing on the big screen. The room fell silent. Her voice echoed, cold, arrogant, cruel. And this time, there was no denying it. When she finished, everyone looked at her, some with indignation, others with disgust. Miguel, sitting in the back rows, just lowered his eyes, not out of fear, but out of compassion. Samantha felt the ground disappear. The woman who thought she was superior was now just a face reflected on the screen, forever trapped in her own arrogance. And the worst was yet to come. The screen went black, but the image seemed to remain alive in everyone's eyes. The air was dense, heavy, almost palpable. The silence was so profound that the distant sound of the air conditioning sounded like thunder. Samantha Collins stood motionless, her face pale and her eyes wide. The video had just played, in front of the entire school, the words she had spoken with such contempt, now echoing back, like a cruel mirror. From the back of the auditorium, someone let out a whisper. Unbelievable. The director, Thomas Reed, got up, slowly. "Professor Collins," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "Would you like to explain what we saw?" Samantha took a deep breath. He tried to maintain his composure. He knew that every word now could be his downfall. She began, her voice trembling. "That was taken out of context. It was just a joke, a misunderstanding." The murmur intensified. Some students laughed, others snorted in indignation. Emily, sitting next to Miguel, crossed her arms and shook her head. Thomas approached, keeping his tone neutral. "A joke?" "Yes," Samantha insisted. "I just wanted to teach the value of effort. This boy," she pointed at Miguel, "he needs to understand that the world is not kind." The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the silence before a storm. Miguel stood up slowly. All eyes turned to him. The boy walked to the center aisle and stood before the audience without trembling. "I know the world isn't kind, Professor," he said, his voice firm, "but the world doesn't have to be cruel either." A murmur ran through the auditorium. Miguel continued, "My parents came to this country believing that work and study could change our lives. I entered this school believing that teachers would show us the way, but you showed me something else." Samantha felt her face burn. "Are you accusing me of racism, is that it?" he countered, trying to regain control. "I don't need to accuse anyone," Miguel replied. "It's all in the video." The sentence was like a final blow. The auditorium erupted in applause, not of joy, but of indignation and support. Samantha stood still, as if the ground had turned to ice beneath her feet. The director raised his hand, asking for silence. "This matter will be brought before the school board, but effective immediately. Professor Collins will be temporarily placed on leave until the investigation is completed." Samantha turned around sharply. "This is absurd. I've worked here for 15 years. Are you going to convict me because of a manipulated video?" Thomas stared at her. "No, teacher. We'll judge her by what she heard come out of her own mouth." The entire auditorium stood up. Some students applauded Miguel. Others just watched, stunned. Samantha felt the weight of every gaze. It was as if all the authority she had built up over the years had dissolved there, under the white light that exposed everything. She stepped off the stage, stumbling slightly. He passed through the corridor of students who were moving away, making his way as if the air between them was contaminated. Some whispered, others filmed discreetly, but no one reached out. Emily looked at Miguel, moved. "You were amazing." "I only told the truth," he replied. "The rest was what she did on her own." Hours later, the school was still in shock. The video continued to spread, and now local media outlets were starting to pick up on the story. Hashtags with the teacher's name were trending on social media, accompanied by words like "racism at school" and "justice for Miguel." At home, Samantha locked the curtains and turned off her cell phone. What was once admiration had now become digital hatred. Anonymous messages, dismissive comments, colleagues who failed to respond. The woman who thought she was untouchable now saw her image publicly shattered. Meanwhile, Miguel arrived home and found his parents at the table. His mother hugged him tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "We are proud of you, my son. I just wish this hadn't happened," he said sincerely. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." The father placed his hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, Miguel, the truth hurts, but it's the only thing that heals what fear builds." Miguel looked out the window and saw the sunset turning the Miami sky golden. For the first time, he felt that something bigger than himself had happened, and that perhaps that pain would serve to change what many pretended not to see. The scandal spread through Miami like wind in a dry field. In just 3 days, the name Samantha Collins was in local headlines and opinion videos on YouTube. Lincoln High teacher accused of racism against Latino student. What had started as a school rumor was now real, live, merciless news. In her house, the curtains remained closed. The phone kept vibrating. Calls from school, messages from journalists, shocked classmates. Samantha sat on the edge of the bed, her hair messy, holding her cell phone like someone holding a gun that shoots at herself. She tried to log into social media, but what she saw made her shudder. Their profiles were covered in comments. Shameful. You don't deserve to teach. Resign before they do worse. He tried to respond, but every justification seemed to turn, to ashes. And the more he tried to defend himself, the deeper he sank. The public was unforgiving, and the internet even less so. On the fourth day, the school called a press conference. The director, Thomas Reed, stood before the cameras, flanked by parents, teachers, and some members of the school board. The auditorium was packed. Miguel, sitting in the back rows, watched in silence, accompanied by Emily. Thomas spoke in a firm voice. Lincoln High School prides itself on its diversity and its values of respect and inclusion. The behavior captured in the video does not reflect who we are or what we stand for. A reporter raised her hand. Principal Reed, will Professor Collins be fired? He took a deep breath. Ms. Collins has been officially removed from her position and is under investigation. However, after receiving new complaints, I can confirm that this case goes beyond an isolated incident. The room was in a murmur. New allegations. Samantha, watching from home, paled. He grabbed his phone and started frantically scrolling through the comments. Some older students now appeared on the school forums. She disapproved of me because I was Mexican. She made fun of my accent in front of everyone. She said that Latinos don't know how to write decent English. The past, which she had believed she had buried beneath impeccable notes and reports, was beginning to emerge. Each new memory, each testimony, was a brick being removed from the wall that protected his reputation. Meanwhile, Miguel tried to move on with his life, but being the center of it all made him restless. He never wanted fame. I just wanted respect. During recess, some students surrounded him. Hey Miguel, man, you're an inspiration. Yeah, bro, you did what no one had the courage to do. He smiled, not knowing what to say. Emily, beside him, noticed the discomfort. They don't understand, do they? She said. You didn't want to humiliate anyone just to be treated as an equal. Miguel nodded. And that's what I hope you learn. But far away, Samantha walked the streets of Miami with sunglasses and a hood, trying to avoid stares. I walked past the shop windows, seeing mothers and children, school bags, books. Everything that had represented what she had been now seemed distant. The respect he demanded with shouts, he lost with silence. That night, the local news broadcast a new story. The anchor said, after new accusations, teacher Samantha Collins may face legal action for discrimination and psychological abuse in a school environment. Parents and students are demanding permanent measures. Images showed protesters in front of the school, signs held high. Education is not racism. Respect begins with those who teach. Justice for Miguel. She watched everything from the living room, motionless. The reflection of the TV flickered in her teary eyes. The world she had controlled with authority now controlled her with revulsion. It was then that he heard the doorbell ring. He opened the door. It was Thomas Reed, the director. I came to tell you personally, he said seriously. The board has decided. You are officially dismissed from Lincoln High. She stared at him, without the strength to react. Is that it? 15 years wasted because of a video? Thomas shook his head. It wasn't the video, Samantha. It was the 15 years that came before it. She closed the door slowly and leaned her forehead against the wood. On the other side, silence answered for her. The next day, the sun rose again over Miami. Life went on. Miguel arrived at school and, for the first time, felt different looks. Not of pity, but of respect. The teachers greeted him, his classmates listened to him, and as he placed the notebook on the table, he realized one simple thing. The real power was not in exposing the error of others, but in don't let mistakes change you. And out there, somewhere in the city, Samantha finally understood the same thing, in the worst way possible. Time passed. but the silence inside Samantha's house felt like a punishment that never ended. The curtains remained closed, the clock on the wall, motionless. The sound of Miami outside was a cruel reminder that the world moved on, with or without her. The days became a sequence of regrets. The nights are too long for those who cannot sleep in peace. The teacher who once prided herself on molding young people was now a hated name, a shameful headline, a negative example in lectures on school ethics. But what hurt the most was not the dismissal, nor the exposure. It was the memory of Miguel's calm voice. That phrase still echoed, "The world doesn't have to be cruel." She repeated it like a mantra, but each time the weight grew heavier. One Saturday morning, Samantha looked in the mirror and barely recognized her reflection. The deep, dark circles, the dull gaze, the features marked by guilt. It was then that he realized there was no point in trying to justify the mistake anymore. She needed to face him. He decided to leave home. Took a bus, no makeup, no disguise. The Miami sun was burning brightly, but she felt cold inside. As he approached the school, he saw a group of students leaving with backpacks and laughing. They recognized her, and silence fell immediately. Some walked away, others just watched her with confused expressions. She took a deep breath and asked the security guard, "Student Miguel Herrera, does he still study here?" The man nodded. "He's at, the gym, helping prepare for the scholarship event." Her heart raced. It was as if each step towards that gymnasium was a journey through one's own shame. Inside, the atmosphere was simple, but full of life. Colorful balloons, handmade posters with phrases about overcoming and dreams. In the midst of the hustle and bustle, Miguel arranged tables with other students. When he saw her, he stopped. Time seemed to freeze. Everyone around realized who it was. An uncomfortable silence spread. Samantha stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Miguel," he said, his voice breaking. "I needed to see you." He was silent, watching her. She continued, "I know there's no excuse for what I did. I humiliated you, treated you as if you were less than. And," her voice trailed off, "and I realized too late that what I was really destroying was myself." Miguel kept his gaze fixed, calm. "Why did you come here?" he asked, not hostilely, but firmly. "Because," she hesitated, "I wanted to ask for forgiveness." The entire gymnasium watched. Some students whispered, others discreetly filmed. But Samantha no longer cared what appeared on camera. She wanted, for once, something to come from the heart. She took a deep breath and continued, "I taught so many students to have character, but I never realized mine was rotting. And the worst part is, it took a humble boy to remind me what it means to be human." Miguel lowered his gaze for a moment. The memory of the humiliation still stung, but he saw something new in it. True regret. He took a step forward. "I forgive you," he said calmly. "Not because what you did was right, but because holding on to hate would be like repeating your lesson." The entire gymnasium fell silent. Samantha began to cry, and for the first time in a long time, those tears felt pure. She placed her hand on her chest, trying to contain the trembling. "Thank you, Miguel. You taught me more than all my years of college." He just smiled serenely. "The world can be harsh, teacher, but it also knows how to forgive when we truly change." That night, a new video was circulating on social media, but it was different from the first. It showed the teacher crying, apologizing, and the humble student offering forgiveness. Thousands of comments appeared again. Now that is true repentance. What an example of humanity. Maybe there is still hope. Samantha didn't return to teaching, but she began giving talks on prejudice, empathy, and personal transformation. And, Miguel, now recognized by the school and local institutions, received a full scholarship to university. Two lives that crossed paths through pain were now united by learning. And fate, as always, served its dish with irony and justice. The teacher learned the greatest lesson she ever taught. 3 years had passed since the day Samantha, in front of the entire school, asked Miguel for forgiveness. Time, which once seemed like an enemy, was now his silent ally, shaping, healing, and teaching. She no longer wore high heels or luxurious clothes. She traded her red lipstick for a simple, genuine smile. After the scandal, Samantha spent months in silence. But when he decided to speak again, it wasn't in a classroom. It was in auditoriums, community centers, and public schools. I was talking about empathy, prejudice, and the importance of listening before judging. The video of the apology went viral, and little by little, his image changed. Not because of an attempt to clear his reputation, but because of the sincerity with which he began to deal with his own mistake. She was now sought out by teachers and parents who wanted to understand how hate turns into learning. But fate, as always, had something more in store for her. One morning, while drinking coffee at a coffee shop in downtown Miami, he received an unexpected email. The sender, Lincoln High School management. The subject, invitation to the closing lecture of the academic year. She stood still, staring at the screen. Heart raced. 3 years without setting foot in that place, and now they were calling her to come back. It took me a few minutes to pluck up the courage to open the message. Professor Collins, the administration and faculty would like to invite you to share your experience at this year's graduation ceremony. We believe that your story can inspire our students to understand the true meaning of change and forgiveness. Samantha placed her cell phone on the table, tears forming in her eyes. For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was as if the past was offering him a chance to come full circle. This time, with dignity. On the day of the ceremony, the old school was packed. Parents, students, teachers, and cameras filled every corner of the gym. The environment was the same, but the energy was completely different. Where there was once arrogance, there was now hope. Samantha arrived early. She stopped in front of the gate and took a deep breath, remembering the day she had left there humiliated. Now she returned not as an authority nor as a culprit, but as someone who had learned the value of rebuild. Director Thomas Reed greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Samantha." "It still feels surreal to be here," she replied. "Life always finds a way to teach the right lessons, doesn't it?" She nodded. Sometimes painfully, but always necessary. When she was called to the stage, the gymnasium fell silent. Samantha walked up to the microphone. He looked at that sea of young faces, and for an instant he saw the reflection of Miguel from 3 years ago in each of them. He smiled and began. "A few years ago, I stood on a stage like this to try to defend myself from something unforgivable. Today, I stand here to give thanks for being forgiven." The audience was attentive. "I thought teaching was about talking, correcting, and demanding. But I discovered that truly teaching is recognize that we are all students of life." He paused, taking a deep breath. "The prejudice that destroys others actually rots the one who carries it. I learned this the hard way, by looking into the eyes of those I hurt." From the back, a figure stood up. Era Miguel Herrera, now in a simple suit and with a badge hanging around his neck. The students began to whisper. Samantha recognized him immediately. Her heart raced. Miguel walked onto the stage, applauded by everyone. He took the microphone and smiled. "I am living proof that forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can transform the future." The gymnasium erupted in applause. Samantha looked at him, moved as he continued. "Professor Collins taught me the most important lesson a student can learn, that we all make mistakes, but only those who have the courage to change truly learn." The two hugged each other, and in that embrace, the entire past fell apart. The wounds that once separated them were now bridges. When the ceremony ended, Samantha walked alone through the school hallways. He stopped in front of the room where it all began, the same painting, the same windows. The sun came in through the cracks and illuminated the empty desks. She smiled. "Thank you, Destiny, for letting me come back different." Outside, Miguel watched her silently. I knew that woman was no longer the same, and that somehow their story had changed the fate of many other students. The past may hurt, but forgiveness heals even the scars no one sees. Months have passed since the graduation where Samantha and Miguel met again on stage. But their story still echoed through the halls of Lincoln High School, now as a living reminder of transformation. The board, inspired by the impact of that ceremony, created a new mentoring program and invited Miguel Herrera, recently graduated in literature, to coordinate the project. He accepted, not out of vanity, but on purpose. I knew what it meant to be the invisible student, the one who walked with his head down, the one who heard hidden laughter. And he also knew the power that a word, spoken with empathy or contempt, could have on someone's life. On his first morning as a teacher, he arrived early. The Miami sun streamed through the living room windows, reflecting off the cabinets and giving the space an almost symbolic light. That same corridor, where he had once been humiliated, now welcomed him as a master. He took a deep breath, placed his badge on his chest, and entered the room. The students talked, laughed, and used their cell phones. When they saw him, the noise stopped. "Good morning, class," he said, smiling. "My name is Miguel Herrera, and yes, I studied here." Some looked at each other, surprised. Others whispered discreetly. He continued, "I want to tell a story about a student who was once humiliated at this school, about a teacher who believed wealth and intelligence were the same thing, and about how fate, one day, brought the two face to face, to teach them respect." Silence filled the room. Miguel looked at each face calmly and concluded, "This story is mine, but it could also be any of yours." The students listened attentively. Miguel didn't speak like someone giving a lesson. He spoke like someone sharing scars. He talked about the difficulties, the prejudice, the day of the video, the pain and forgiveness. But there was no resentment in his voice, only learning. "I could have let hate win," he said. "I could have given up, become like the one who hurt me. But I discovered that hate is a cruel teacher. It teaches quickly but destroys everything around it." A girl raised her hand. "And what happened to the teacher?" Miguel smiled tenderly. "She changed, and she taught me something no book could teach, that whoever has the courage to apologize overcomes their own ego." The class remained silent. Some students were visibly emotional. Others discreetly wiped away their tears. That afternoon, Miguel was called to the principal's office. Thomas Reed. The man received him with a proud smile. "Miguel, I heard. Your first class was a success. I hope I managed to touch at least one heart," he replied. "It touched many," said the principal. "And that's why we want you to stay, not just as a temporary teacher, but as part of the permanent staff." Miguel was speechless. The boy who was once rejected now became an example of the very school that hurt him. "I accept," he replied emotionally, "but only on one condition. I want the school to maintain a permanent scholarship program so that no student has to go through what I went through." Thomas smiled. "Done." A few weeks later, while preparing his classes, Miguel received an unexpected visit. Samantha Collins entered the room, now with gray hair and a serene look in her eyes. "May I come in?" he asked. "Of course," he replied, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." She smiled. "I heard you're now your student's favorite teacher. I came to congratulate you. And thank you." Michael stood up and greeted her respectfully. "You don't need to thank me, teacher. Life has already taught us both." "Still thank you," she said, "for forgiving me and for proving to me that people really can change." They talked for a while, like old friends sharing a distant past. Before leaving, Samantha looked around and said, "It's strange, isn't it?" "What?" "Being in the same room where it all began, and seeing that in the end the most important lesson was taught by someone who was once called a poor student." Miguel smiled. "Life has a special way of correcting its own tests." She chuckled softly and said goodbye. Watching her leave, Miguel felt a silent peace. The story had finally come full circle. That night, he wrote a simple but powerful sentence on the board in his living room. "Education is not about measuring someone's worth. It's about helping them discover their own worth." And as he looked at those words, he realized that the humiliated boy had disappeared. In his place was the teacher who transformed the world, one student at a time. The auditorium of Lincoln High School was crowded again, but this time there was no tension, no judgmental looks, just pride, gratitude, and excitement. The chairs were filled with teachers, students, parents, and representatives of the Miami community. On the main stage, a banner displayed the words, Citizenship and Empathy Award, Tribute to Miguel Herrera. The soft sound of a piano echoed through the speakers as guests took photos and exchanged greetings. For many, it was, just a school event. But for Miguel, that moment represented the closing of a journey that began with pain and ended with purpose. He was sitting in the front row, wearing a simple suit and a serene smile. On her left, Emily, now her co-worker and best friend. On the right, his parents, moved, proud to see their son, who was once humiliated, now become an example of dignity for the entire school. The director, Thomas Reedy, went up on stage and, with a firm voice, began his speech. A few years ago, at this very school, we witnessed a sad episode, a moment when we forgot the true meaning of education. But from that pain came a lesson that transformed us all. He paused, looking at Miguel. Today, we celebrate not only the success of a teacher, but the power of empathy and courage. Miguel Herrera taught us that forgiveness is the first step to healing what hatred destroys. The audience rose to their feet in applause. Miguel took a deep breath, feeling his heart beat in time with the emotion that filled the room. The director called him to the stage. He walked slowly, feeling the light weight of responsibility. With every step, flashes and claps echoed like a soundtrack of redemption. When he reached the microphone, he looked around. He saw familiar faces, old colleagues, teachers, and among them, Samantha Collins, sitting discreetly in the last row. She smiled, with tears in her eyes. Miguel took the microphone and began. I entered this school years ago with fear. Fear of not being accepted, of being invisible, of being judged for what I wore and not for what I dreamed of. But ironically, it was here that I discovered the power of something money can't buy. Respect. The lights in the auditorium reflected in his eyes, which shone with sincerity. I learned that prejudice is like a shadow. It follows us until the light of conscience dispels it. And this light only appears when we have the courage to look at the other and see a human being. He paused. The audience was absolutely silent. When I was humiliated, I thought my voice was worthless. But today, I understand that every word spoken with truth can change the course of many lives, including our own. Miguel took a deep breath. And if I'm here today, it's because someone had the humility to ask for forgiveness, and because I had the courage to accept it. Samantha lowered her head, overcome with emotion. Tears were streaming down her face, but there was peace on her face. Miguel continued. Empathy isn't a gift. It's a choice. And that's why I chose to be a teacher. To remind every student that no one is too small to dream, and no one is too big to make mistakes. The audience rose again. The applause was long, sincere, almost cathartic. Parents cried, students hugged each other, teachers looked at each other in admiration. It was more than a speech. It was a mirror for everyone who has made mistakes and still has time to change. After the ceremony, Miguel stepped down from the stage and walked to the back of the auditorium. Samantha stood up and waited for him. Congratulations, Professor, she said, smiling with genuine pride. Thank you, Professor, he replied with a slight nod. And thank you for coming back. I couldn't help but see what you've become. I only became this because one day you showed me who I never wanted to be again. She smiled through her tears. So I guess in the end I taught something too. Yes, he replied, just not in the way I expected. The two laughed discreetly. It was the laughter of someone who understood that the past, however painful it was now at peace. That night, when the auditorium emptied, Miguel was left alone on the stage. He looked at the lights slowly fading and thought about how it all began. A room, a humiliation, a choice. And he smiled, because he understood that destiny neither punishes nor rewards. It educates. Years have passed since the ceremony that marked the definitive transformation of Lincoln High School. The students in that audience had already followed their paths. Some became doctors, engineers, artists, and some, like Miguel, chose the path of education. His name was now engraved on murals, projects, and hearts. But time, generous to those who learn, had also been kind to Samantha. She continued to speak, visit schools, and mentor new teachers on empathy and respect. The scandal that once destroyed her had become her mission, and that autumn, fate would bring them together one last time. The school was under renovation. The old building, which had housed so many stories, would be modernized. However, Director Thomas Reed, now about to retire, wanted to do something special before stepping down. He called a meeting with the faculty and proposed something symbolic. Room 204, where it all began, will be transformed into a learning space about diversity and human values, and I want the name to be chosen by those who experienced this change firsthand. Everyone knew who he meant. The following week, Miguel and Samantha were invited to attend. When they arrived, they stood in front of the door to the old room. Same number, same corridor. But now the air was different, light, welcoming, full of meaning. Inside the room, a cloth-covered plaque awaited them. The students, teachers, and even some former students were gathered. The director approached and, with a choked voice, said, "This school learned one of the greatest lessons in its history within these four walls. Today, we immortalize this story as a symbol of transformation and empathy." He looked at Samantha and Miguel. "Please remove the cloth." The two approached, side by side. Samantha felt her hands tremble. Miguel, calm, smiled. Together they pulled the fabric. And there it was. Room 204, Miguel Herrera and Professor Samantha Collins' space. Here, mistakes became lessons learned, pain became forgiveness, and prejudice became a lesson. The audience gave a standing ovation. Some were crying, others just smiled, feeling the silent power of that gesture. Samantha turned to Miguel, moved. "I never imagined seeing my name next to yours. After all," he replied calmly, "and I never imagined that forgiving someone could make me so free." She smiled. "Maybe that's the real way to teach." "Yes," he replied. "Teaching isn't about being perfect. It's about having the courage to change." The two remained silent, observing the sign. The sun's reflection came in through the window and illuminated the words, engraved in metal, as if time itself wanted to immortalize that moment. At the inauguration ceremony, Miguel spoke briefly. "This room doesn't belong to me, nor to Professor Samantha. It belongs to every student who has ever been underestimated and every teacher who has had the courage to transform themselves." He paused, looking at everyone. "May this place always remember that education is not about who knows more. It is about who chooses to listen." The applause rang out again, and as the crowd dispersed, Samantha remained for a moment, alone in the room. He ran his fingers over the plate and whispered, "Thank you, Miguel, for teaching me what I spent my life pretending to know." She left slowly, and Miguel stayed. He looked around, the whiteboard, the desks, the late afternoon light. He smiled. That place, which was once a scene of pain, was now a temple of hope. Outside, the wind blew lightly through the trees. The students' voices echoed in the courtyard, mixing laughter, dreams, and plans. Miguel watched from afar and felt a simple but profound certainty. No story ends in error. It just starts over again, in forgiveness. True learning arises when pride is silenced and the heart listens. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it lights the path forward. And every room, even 204, can become a home of empathy when love conquers prejudice.